Hello, I'm I.Stephanie Boyce CBE, the former president of the Law Society of England and Wales. And in March 2021, I made history when I became the first person of colour to lead the professional body. Today, I've spoken lots about leadership, ethics, integrity, what it takes to lead in a very geopolitically charged world that we find ourselves in. I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Today, we are delighted to be joined on the Stakeholder Impact Forum by Stephanie Boyce, who also now is Stephanie Boyce CBE, I believe, who is a pioneering leader in governance, inclusion, ethical leadership, and has basically been a pioneer in many fields over her career. And we're really excited to talk through a lot of different subjects today, really kind of focusing on the types of things that organizations are feeling and how having a kind of push mentality, which we'll get into, really can help all organizations across all sectors. Stephanie, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
And yeah, I really have to start with congratulations on being knighted. Is it knighted in the King's New Year's Honours?
I wish. No.
I don't know what they call it. Is it awarded in the...
Yes. So I've been honoured with a CBE, which is the commander of the Order of the British Empire, in the King's New Year's Honours list. And you know, for my services to the legal profession, to diversity and to access to justice. And I'm absolutely delighted to have my work recognised with this. And of course, I've long spoken about what I do of service, not for position or title. But I'm going to have to change that line now.
Absolutely. And I think really it's a fantastic place to start, because let's kind of focus on, you know, you've now been awarded this achievement. You've got to there, but how has that personal and professional journey shaped the way you think about leadership and the role organizations play in society?
Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the things in receiving this honour, you know, and the outpouring of just, you know, compliments and comments and all of that I've received, some of which has caused me to reflect, and indeed this honour has caused me to reflect, because of what it took to get this, what it took to get here. And what I've always said, and you know, and I will always be grateful for the platform that being president of the Law Society of England and Wales gave me. But this, you know, Stephanie Boyce was always here, but it took a platform such as presidency to be able to give me that spotlight, that visibility, to really shine through. And so this period has been quite reflective. It's been very emotional. And hopefully it's a signal to others that, you know, if I did it, absolutely everyone can do it. And whilst that may not be in recognition of an honours or receipt of an honours, it's the fact that actually, if we can see ourselves somewhere, if we can see ourselves in those positions, then absolutely we can do it.
Amazing. And I think really you kind of touched on there of leadership and the presidency. When you work with that organization and other organizations as well, what have you seen as the key things that make differences in decision making and leading organizations when you've been in that kind of position throughout your career?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I should firstly say, for those who don't know what the Law Society does or is about, it is the professional body for solicitors in England and Wales. And we number about just over 200,000 solicitors. So being through that work and doing work with other organizations, the one thing that I think certainly, and the thing I've spoken about lots of late, is an absence of ethical leadership. And we're seeing that play out quite a bit at the moment. It seems to be in short supply at the moment. And one of the things we do when we do admission ceremonies at the Law Society, which is when newly qualified solicitors come to the Law Society and they receive that ceremony, that official recognition from an office holder or past office holder, we talk about integrity. We talk about it is something you either have or you don't have. You can't have a bit of it. And that's the thing that I think is lacking, is that whole ethics. And I think we need to have broader discussions about that. I know there are some people who are suggesting that actually that needs to start a lot younger in schools. But one of the things amongst leaders, and, anybody can lead, because that's the other issue I have, is that actually we have long had this notion, this idea of what leaders should look like, what they should sound like. And I heard lots about that along the way. The 4 attempts it took me to become president, we need someone who can converse with government. You'll get frustrated with the workings of this building. People who are willing to write me off because perhaps I didn't fit into a certain persona or idea of what they think a leader should look like. And of course, on the global stage at the moment, where there is an absence of what one would deem as leaders, we need to look a bit deeper.
Absolutely.
And I think that was the thing that my presidency, and indeed post-presidency, has shone a light on. That actually, I redefined what a leader is, looks like, sounds like. Everything they said that I shouldn't do, I didn't wait for permission. I just did it and then asked for permission after. But as organizations, what I think organizations and leaders should be doing is we should be listening. Listening to what's going on, the difference that people make when they have their voices heard. If you are a chair or you're leading a meeting, you're sat around a table with other people, who's the voice that's not speaking up in that room? Because in my view, it's not appropriate to invite people to the table, to give them a seat at the table if you're not going to allow their voice to be heard. So who's not speaking up in the room? Because throughout my career, I've not always been the most vocal. And lots of my colleagues on council, when I was on council, will tell you that I didn't speak much, but when I spoke, I had something to say. So I think lots of this is about listening and, in the current exercise charged climate of social media and, populist culture and all of that, we could all do with listening a bit more.
Absolutely. And I think it's also that you kind of mentioned it there of, it's not just diversity in the terms that are being thrown around in terms of HR and things. It's diversity of ideas and diversity of listening to multiple different people, multiple different stakeholders, to really kind of get a broader understanding of the direction that needs to be gone, for whatever your organization does. And I think that kind of links us to purpose, which for organizations, whether that's the Law Society, whether that's the National Trust, or whether that's a charity, what is your purpose? And I think you've really kind of focused a lot around purpose and vision in all of your roles. What do you see as the kind of challenges to how organizations can deliver that purpose, and how have you overcome those?
I think one of the challenges is about some of this performative actions we've seen. So it might be right to put out a press statement. It might be right to put out, statements about targets that lack any strategy or credibility behind them. But it's performative and popular to put out a statement. The other thing is, of course, when lots of people talk about diversity, people assume they're talking about just one thing. They don't think about the fact that, as you mentioned, that we're talking about diversity of thought. We're talking about diversity of geography, where people live, their experiences, their lived experiences as to what they bring to the table. And we see this in politics, that if you fill a room with people who just, pat each other on the back, celebrate each other because, they're speaking the same language, we get the same thing over and over all the time. And I think what people want is they want that diversity. They want people to think differently. Whether we call it diversity, whether we call it something else, because diversity, unfortunately, has become a charged word at the moment. Whatever we call it, it means allowing other voices that perhaps may not agree. And we don't always have to agree, but we can agree to disagree, but we do so well. And so purpose and vision is being able to articulate, not always, because, as you trundle through, you might be thinking about and having to navigate, what does this mean to me? I go into an organization An organization says one thing, but it does another thing. How do I embed my understanding of what that organization's purpose is, and how does that gel or chime with me? And what can I do to influence that organization, that culture in a positive way, and bring all of those voices to the table and to be listened to and to be heard?
Absolutely. And I suppose, a lot of that comes into how an organization structures that, how it kind of puts that on the table. What are the what's the framework for how to bring the stakeholders together, how to get all those ideas in there? Have you, seen any challenges that are kind of prohibiting that ecosystem of diverse thought and diverse ideas? And why do you think those are coming to a head right now in terms of organizations and the stakeholders not being able to come together to really foster that kind of ideal that you're talking about there?
I think we have lost the art of debate, proper debate. Not, and going back to what I said a short while ago about the ability to disagree, right? But to disagree well. So I might not agree with everything you say, but it doesn't mean I have to, I hate you and that's it. We're never going to speak forever. Absolutely. It's the point that we can have a conversation without shouting at each other, without disagreeing if we're going to, but we do so in a grown-up way, and we've lost the art of that. And also, given the geopolitical tensions and indeed, the domestic challenges that we face, there are competing interests amongst different groups. And what some of us have done is we have divided. I don't know if you've heard about what about me, that whataboutery. So you establish a group for X, you've got to establish a group for Y. And then it goes on and goes on and goes on and goes on. And actually, we lose sight of what is the common thing we are trying to erase, eradicate, to challenge, to dismantle. And so I think for lots of us, it is about the absence of actually thinking and pausing before we speak, before we type on our keyboards, because we had that before. Certainly when I was growing up, it was that actually you were your armchair critic. You shouted at the TV. I mean, I never did that, but you shouted at the TV. If you disagreed with someone, you shouted at the TV. Now people take to their social media profile and so forth, and they start posting. They don't think about the consequences personally, collectively, or the responsibility that comes with whether it's in their household or their community or as a citizen. They don't think about that.
That's really interesting. And you touched on something there that I think has come up quite a few times in the leaders and the thought leaders we've spoken with, which is organizations, rightly so, I think, in a lot of times, have created these subgroups. So we've spoken to people in the tech organizations, and they were mentioning about women in tech, and then diversity groups. What is your feeling on that kind of approach from the leadership of, are subgroups a positive way of getting engagement and getting stakeholders to interact, or are you missing out on that kind of full spectrum of people, as you say, debating whether they agree or not, to build up to a more forward-thinking cause?
I think that's the point, isn't it? The groups have to think about, why were they established in the first place? What is their objective? What is it that they're trying to achieve? And I think lots of times is that some of these groups become a talking shop, and they perhaps lose sight of their purpose, their original objective, what it was that they were established to achieve. And, I had a young lady who contacted me the other day because she was caught up in one of these groups where actually it was becoming quite toxic. People were perhaps going beyond the reams of professionalism, and some of the ideas that were being espoused in those groups were quite extreme, to want for a better word. Not extreme in the sense of, criminality or so forth, but extreme. And, it became for her as to whether or not it remained credible for her to remain in that group. Because if that, despite it being a locked group and Chatham House rules and all of that, what if some of that stuff got leaked out. And that's what she was worried about, is that being associated with some of those comments if that information got leaked out. So she took the decision to leave that group. But the point is that that's an extreme example. But the point is, there are lots of groups who are doing excellent work and understand their purpose, understand the objective that they're working towards. And they're really highlighting some of the barriers that exist, whether that's women in tech, whether that's, and sorry, if there is a group, women in tech, I'm just using that as a general example rather than a specific group. Where there are groups who are doing excellent work and really spotlighting the barriers, structural barriers that exist within whatever it is they're trying to achieve. But there are other groups, I think, that have been created just for the sake of creating a group, and I think they have lost sight of their objectives and their purpose.
Absolutely. And I think one of the big ones at the moment, specifically for member and stakeholder-led organizations, is the balance of young, Gen Z and younger people coming into the workforce and the older, more established. And I don't know if you've any experience in young people working with older, more established stakeholders. We're not going to move anywhere if we don't let those two kind of meet and interact rather than keeping them separate. I don't know if you've kind of seen any instances of that.
So, I mean, absolutely. So that's the point. We have about 5 to 6 different generations working in the workplace alongside each other at the moment. But we seem to have defaulted, and I think this is a global issue as well. We seem to have defaulted to an us and them position, and that's across the spectrum. Whatever group, because people or organizations, politicians and the like have been just too ready to slot people into groups and organizations. Someone said to me yesterday, if you live in America, for instance, they said, I don't understand why you have to declare publicly what political party you belong to. We have a bit of anonymity here, but you have to register somewhere. I didn't go into the details of it, as to what political group you align yourself with. And you can see, just imagine if we had to register somewhere and say what our political affiliation was, what our, favorite color was, our favorite, part of the country, all of those things. And it's a bit like, low traffic neighborhoods, some people like them, some people don't. But the whole point is that, some people have spoken about the fact that they're done to kind of restrict and contain. And I think this us and them mentality is restricting us and containing us to a particular thought, a particular experience, and so forth. And actually, we're human beings. We're social creatures for the most part. And we want to be everywhere, or certainly I do, everywhere and lots of places, sharing ideas and bouncing ideas. Doesn't mean that you'll like my idea at times, but if you don't, it means that, I have done so. I've exchanged ideas, but I don't tear you down for not sharing my idea or my thoughts.
Beautifully put. You kind of touched on it previously around listening and what you did in your role, in the leadership role of listening. When we think about purpose and the challenges that we're facing that you've just laid out beautifully there, what does actually strong leadership look like for you, for purpose-led organizations today? And I'm thinking specifically around the resilience angle and the relevance. I think that's a really key word that keeps coming up, and just be really keen to hear your experiences there.
Accountability. Accountability is cool. We've lost sight of some of our leaders being accountable or even taking responsibility. Integrity, which I mentioned before, transparency, public trust is being eroded. Some of those things, that we have long held onto, that we have taken for granted, are being eroded. Whether that's in our own communities, whether it's having our rubbish collected, or, our ability to just go about our day-to-day business in a safe way. that trust and that confidence is being eroded. So for me, what does a leader look like? And first of all, anyone has the ability, in my view, to be a leader. And I think, we have long, as I said, subscribed to this idea. If you look at, for instance, and I talk too much about politics, but this is a great example. But if you look at our last, I think, 18 prime ministers, I think 18, so I think about 13 of them, I think, or a bit more actually, I think 15 of them have gone to Oxford. They have followed a particular trajectory. 3 who didn't go to university, of course, and I always get this wrong, Churchill Major, and is it Wilson? Might be Wilson. I always get it wrong, but there's a third one there who didn't go to university. But if you look at that trajectory, and what is that saying to our young people? What is that saying to anyone? Why is it that our young people cannot sit in their home and harbour ambitions about becoming a prime minister of this country? And that they could be plucked from any and everywhere. Why have we consigned ourselves to a ruling elite? And that's in businesses as well. When I left office, I had people who said to me, despite the fact that I had led a multi-million pound business, whatever, they and a membership of how many tens of thousands. You've never sat on a blue chip company, Stephanie. You don't have experience of a corporate board. So I'm afraid, you can't, we don't actually see you getting onto one of these. And that is the reality of the society we sit in. We exclude people because they haven't followed a certain trajectory, because they don't belong to a certain group and a certain class, because let's talk about social mobility and class in this country, right? We exclude certain individuals from positions. And I think we do ourselves as a society, as a nation, as a world, we do ourselves an absolute disservice.
100%. And it is almost a cookie cutter kind of approach, isn't it? Of you have to do this and this and this to get to this. And it's when you lay it out like that, it's undeniable, which is
absolutely.
worrying.
And can I just add, absolutely, can I just add about merit as well? Because this is something that I've called out lots, where people talk about, so as we've kind of rolled back from equality, diversity, inclusion, people talk about returning back to appointing on merit. Yeah. I have no problem with people appointing on merit. The problem I have is that merit is not being applied or distributed equitably. And that goes back to the version or the example I just gave about actually who we see and, and put in positions of power and influence.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you mentioned it, you said about the sofa critics, and you said about then of the aspiration of being a child, being a teenager, being an adult of whatever age, and still being able to aspire to things. We talked about the leadership angle, but there is a sense of, especially with member organizations, with stakeholder-led organizations, with purpose-led organizations, of there is a community that they should be able to establish. The leadership has responsibility, but what can organizations do to engage the stakeholders, to engage them with the purpose, to engage them with the transparency, the accountability, all the things you just mentioned that the leadership should deliver, but if the stakeholders aren't engaging with it? So I think there's a kind of through line there of all the things you just said, but in your experience, how can we get those kind of stakeholders to feel, I want to play my part in the accountability, play my part in the ethics, play my part in the purpose?
Well, absolutely. Some of that is about, a leader is a person, I guess, at the end of the day, who can command respect, authority, who has a bit of charisma, who people want to listen to. They want to follow, or at least they want to be seen to be subscribed to what that individual is signed up to. And so I think for lots of people that, certainly when I was president, one of the things that the president did was you'd meet with senior partners and so forth, and you'd have discussions. But what I wanted to do was I wanted to not just have a weekly meeting with senior partners of large firms. I wanted to go out and meet people on the ground. I went to the law centres.
Brilliant.
I went to citizen advice bureaus. I went to schools. I went to universities. I went to large firms, small firms, high street firms. I went anywhere where I was invited. I went into care homes, hospitals, everywhere. Because the message wasn't just about us as legal professionals. It was about the law and the fact that the law touches every part of our lives. You cannot escape it. But yet it bothers me and continues to bother me how little we, the public, or the public knows about the law and the impact on their lives. So for leaders, it is about know your audience, absolutely know your audience. Make sure there is clarity in messaging, and your communication is absolutely key, because you can be the best leader, but if nobody knows what your message is or what you stand for or what you're trying to say or articulate, you absolutely lose people. And I think the other thing is you've got to be a strategist and you've got to be agile. You have to be, every single day has to be a learning day. You have to get into that growth mindset, learn something new every single day. And if you're not learning something new every single day, you have to ask yourself, why not? And that's the point. So don't be stuck in your ivory tower. You get out and you walk the floor. You meet people. You introduce yourself. You speak to them and you gather, because that's what I did. When I went out, I was gathering data. When I do admission ceremonies, I speak to the admittees and I'm asking them about their practice, what part of the country they're from, what did it take to get here? All of that information feeds into, the data that's being gathered. So, as well as informing my own work. So get out and listen and talk to individuals, your workforce, walk the floor, and be seen.
Brilliant advice. And comes back to what we said right at the top, which is the listening, stakeholder listening, constantly being open to listening. And you touched on their data and, what's new, finding out what's new. You're really quite, I was going to say pioneer, but you're very involved in and focused on AI and what that means for, all industries and all sectors, I think. And you mentioned there a little bit around truth and clarity and transparency, and obviously don't always go hand in hand with AI and where the AI comes from and who owns the AI and what the kind of makeup of the people that are taking the AI. So it's obviously impacting a lot of how we engage as businesses, as industries, as organizations. In your experience, with quite a lot of experience in AI, how can we approach AI with integrity and that inclusive mindset?
I mean, that's a very topical question because, of course, the government...
Quite a big one, sorry.
Yeah. So the government has just launched a consultation, if I remember correctly. And what they are seeking to do is that they recognize that AI, is everywhere. Technology is everywhere. It is moving at pace. And what they want to look at as they roll it out further and further is actually about the regulatory side and how it can be rolled out with that integrity safely. I'm still reading the consultation, but anyone interested, the government is seeking ideas and feedback on it. And you can find it just Google it, and you should be able to find the government consultation on AI. I forget what it's specifically called, but it's out there. Actually, I'll tell you what's specifically called. So the deployment of AI-enabled products and services that current regulations hinder. So the whole point about artificial intelligence, my concern around it, and I'm glad that the government is doing this. I'm glad that more and more people are speaking and being concerned as to this technology that's being rolled out. It's only today or the last couple of days that we started to hear about a particular AI enabled chatbot or technology that is taking pictures of individuals and regenerating them in a very disrespectful way, in a very sexualized way at times. This technology is pervasive. We also heard in the last couple of days that, as shoplifting has rocketed in this country, we've also heard that facial recognition has been rolled out to try and stem shoplifting. But unfortunately, innocent people are being caught up in this facial recognition. That, one particular lady went into a shop. She was approached very publicly, humiliated. It turned out within 24 hours or so that this technology was wrong. But, I would be absolutely mortified. Could you imagine if I was in my local shop and I was approached and said that? You could imagine what may come out of that. So the whole point is that as we see these big tech bros, as they're referred to, as they start to wield their influence globally, because it's not just, and yes, Great Britain has the potential to be one of the leading countries in this technology and so forth. It should not come at expense of integrity, safety, our values, our principles, all of that. And the difficulty with some of this technology that's been rolled out without any real safeguards in place currently, and Ofcom, does a lot of, shouting and so forth. The difficulty is that as we pursue economic development and, and growth and so forth, that actually it gets lost in all of this, because who is going to put their head above the parapet and say, actually, we need proper regulation, we need proper guardrails, safeguards, and algorithms. I was saying to my mother this morning, because my mother's now talking about it, so we know that this is really starting to worry people, that these algorithms, you think about every single aspect of our lives, is being dominated more and more by these algorithms, whether it's within finance, whether it's, as to who gets a mortgage, who gets a bank account, whether it's in health, that, of course, this big push to reduce waiting times in the NHS, whether it's what we watch on TV, suggested reading, suggested watching, clothes, you name it, it's everywhere. And the difficulty is that I remain, and many others remain, concerned about, is the biases that are contained with these algorithms. So to give you an example, if you are a poster on a certain social media channel, I only do two, but one of them I have long complained about AI and algorithms. And if I complain about that, my posts get pushed. I get about two, interactions, because nobody wants to hear me talking about algorithms. And actually, we need to be more critical and aware of the pervasiveness of this technology. But, we don't know what's behind these algorithms. We've got people who are programming these technologies to impact our lives, but yet we know nothing about them. We don't know how they operate. And then they get into the big wide web, and people take those to another level that, and we saw that, of course, a couple of years ago when, last year, I think it was, when the riot, or the year before, when the riots broke out,
Yes.
all of that. So that's my concern. That's my worry, that if you're going to dictate who goes, and of course, if you look at it from the justice aspect, are we going to have algorithms who are going to decide who will go to jail, who won't go to jail, who will be released from prison, who won't be released from prison? Who should get a judgment? What decisions should be made? All of those things are absolutely concerning, and we should be concerned.
Absolutely. And I think it comes back to trust, and a lot of the reason that the types of leaders that you're mentioning, and the ones that I think we're all very aware of at this current state and current time, especially in the last week or so, is that they're using trust and using mistrust, and they're using the kind of algorithms to their benefit. So if we come back to organizations, and you mentioned there, leaders that want to be purpose-driven, leaders that want to be forward-thinking, need to get their messaging right, need to get what they're saying and what good they're doing and their strategy across. What opportunities are there for organizations to get across and to use trust in a positive way, to get their message across and to engage their stakeholders?
So you've got to build trust. You've got to earn trust. and you've got to establish yourself as a credible organization. And we have seen, perhaps in the last couple of years, where we've had a trusted media institution, the go-to organization where for news, for factual news and so forth, that how the trust has been eroded. Some of it has been, some of it's been self-inflicted, whereas others, where, others have just been imposed. And I think the difficulty with organizations is we have to, if something works well, look at what others are doing. What can you learn from others? What's working well? What's not working well? Don't wait for the avalanche to hit you. Get out of the way before that, or protect yourself and think about, how can I prepare myself? As I say, we live in times where when I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning, whatever, the news has moved on, since then. And as a leader, we've got so much coming at us, but you have to be in that space where you've got a credible circle of people around you. You also have to be up to date. You have to be very aware as to what's going on around you. Coaching is a good one. If you don't have a coach, perhaps get one. If you look at all of the more established people, they've got coaches. But you really have to be open and aware. And I think that's one of the things that makes a great leader. We all remember somebody who we felt that we could approach, even if it wasn't that we could go up to them and say hello, it was that we felt that actually they were speaking to us. And it was something that we could relate to. And I think, so as leaders, you have to be constantly aware of your surroundings, what's going on around you, but do not operate in a bubble. Speak to others, join a group, but not the us and them group. Join the group of, all learning, all aspiring, and so forth.
And you mentioned it earlier with yourself about putting your head above the parapet. And I think there's a kind of real feeling of organizations not wanting to do that at the moment. Everyone's playing it safe. Everyone doesn't want to rock the boat too much because the boat is on a very strange journey at the moment.
Yeah. And look where it's got us.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think a lot of the people that we'll probably be talking about here are not your Trumps and your Musks. They're people who are going ahead with their career. They may have had a long career. They maybe have just reframed their career. Why would you say that the need for putting yourself above the parapet and also to really, I think you mentioned it earlier, is to have those beliefs and to really stick with them? And I think it's something that you embody, which is to persevere until something happens. Making sure that you use that kind of mentality of, no, this is our belief. This is what we believe in. We're going to keep going, but still listening, still bringing in the news, still listening to that diverse ecosystem. Why is it important for these types of organizations to stand out a little bit and put their head above the parapet, would you say, right?
Well, absolutely. If you look at values-driven organizations or values-driven individuals, they do it, they embody that collectiveness, that collaboration, that, all of those things that we've spoken about, the integrity, the ethics, all of those things. Because what they don't do is they don't divide and rule. They bring people with them. And I think, it is difficult at times being a leader. It's lonely. Let's be honest. It's lonely at times. And that's why you have to surround yourself with good people, and you have to be assured of yourself as well. And so many people said to me, and certainly in lots of the comments, the congratulatory comments that I have received surrounding my CBE, people have said about, you stuck to what you believed in, but I didn't do it in a way that excluded people. I did it in a way that brought people with me. So if somebody said to me, somebody challenged me or whatever, I still engaged with them. And I was prepared to change my view or to agree, to disagree well, or to learn from what they were saying, or how could I do things differently? And I think, lots of people said to me, that they used to say to me, why have you not got an honours yet? Or as somebody said, when I was recently on a panel, they said, I was very vocal as president when there were claims of lefty lawyers and all of that. And I came out very strongly and said and defended our professionals. And I was asked, do you think that is why you sit there with no position or title? And I said very clearly, I have no doubt. That is, that was last year. But I said, I have no doubt. That is perhaps why I have no position or title. Because we don't like people. And it's a real, it's an interesting challenge, because we don't actually like people who come out and are honest and tell the truth. But we equally don't like people who tell the truth. There's a bit like, I was listening to something earlier today, and they were talking about, and gave an example of a man with a donkey who had the little boy, the donkey was carrying the little boy. The passersby said, look at that man look at the little boy who's letting that old man, walk. He should get off and let the old man get on. The old man, the little boy gets off, the old man gets on, and others say, oh my goodness, look at that. Yes, you can imagine, right? We're never going to get everyone to agree, and everybody's going to see things differently. And we had lots of that with different law firms and businesses and organizations capitulating when the American administration started to bear down. But it takes an individual, a strong, purpose-driven individual, and sometimes you have to get uncomfortable in order to get comfortable and actually stand up for what you believe in. And okay, some people might say that's exactly what's happening, is that people are being ideology-driven and they're standing up for what they believe in, but not at the expense or of others. Let's leave it at that.
Absolutely. And I think, you kind of mentioned it at the top, which is the listening, going out, being part of the community, listening to the shop floor. Because I think that top-down approach, that Oxford leadership, the cookie cutter that we mentioned, it's a narrative that puts people in a place instantly, even if you're completely new to the world of work or a particular industry, you're instantly into that. And maybe it is a complete reframe of the narrative of a bottom-up approach or a global approach or a circular approach. I don't know what the answer is, but I think what you're saying is that by listening, by being more open, by not being led so much by the kind of traditional and the ideological idea, we can kind of move towards something more collective and more community focused.
Absolutely. And not just being populist, not just going along with something because it's popular. Go along with something because it's the right thing to do. And not just the right thing for you, but it's who can I bring with me? And I've always, been clear about service, being of service. And I think the difficulty is that lots of, whether it's, organizations, politics, whatever, what we see is lots of people being self-serving as opposed to of service. And it's putting people off. It's driving people to vocalize their frustrations elsewhere. It's driving that division. And what we need is we need a pause, a full stop, and actually somebody to say, we want a collective. What is it we stand for? Because if you don't stand for anything, you'll stand for nothing. Oh, I think I've got that the wrong way around. If you stand for nothing, you'll stand for anything. And I think people need to actually take a look and reflect. And that's all of us. Because I do believe that all of us have the potential to be leaders, whether that's in our homes, whether it's in our workplace, our communities, whatever. But what does it truly mean to us to lead?
That's a beautiful note to kind of wrap it all up. My kind of final question for you is, obviously, there's a learning to be had from listening to everyone in a particular sector. If we think broader than that, if we think more global, if we think more kind of sector to sector, what gives you hope that there are kind of ways for that, exactly what you just mentioned there, of community focused, not so ideological, maybe even not so profit driven, how we can kind of work together to create positive and lasting change so that we're not still talking about this in 10 years.
Yeah. More than ever, we have to cling on to that hope. we really have to pull together, because there are still a lot of good people out there. There are still a lot of people who want to be of service, who want to lead differently, who want to inspire and aspire and so forth, and who've got a lot to offer. And I think what we need to do is we need to have more of those debates, those discussions, and we need to absolutely do more of that listening, in a respectful way, in a collaborative way, and in a shared inclusive way. And I hold out hope for that. And I know at times for lots of us, it feels as if, that's an ideology that's so far away. But I absolutely do hold out hope for us as a global nation that, what unites us is going to, or we have more in common that will unite us than what will divide us.
Beautiful. And as we saw, putting your head above the parapet, you have been honoured. We've been honoured to have you as part of this forum and to hear lots of challenges, lots of things that we do need to overcome, but also that the opportunities, the message of hope. And thank you so much for taking your time today, Stephanie. And we look forward to engaging more in the future on, this very important topic.
Thank you.